They are recommending the plan of service and also the zoning associated with the parcels of land that we just described. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Stan, I have a quick question. You hadn't received any back or anything from the neighbors out there?
No, sir.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion to second. Stan, can we take all this in one motion?
You can, as long as you specify in the motion that each thing, that you're approving the annexation, that you're approving the plan of service, and that you approve the zoning classes that are associated with that annexation.
Councilman Cisco, is that your motion? All right. I have a motion to second. Before we proceed any further, this is an item on first reading, so open the public hearing. Is there anyone in opposition to or in favor of this ordinance? Up here and have a seat and state your name for the record, please.
Mayor, City Council, you can put the first map you had back up.
Name and then
I'm sorry, Kent McLemore, and I own this property here, and then my family owns the property that fronts right here. We don't have any objection to it, we just want to make sure that all the planning and the stormwater type situations are taken into account, because even on this property here and with Smallwoods and on the next side of us where SolQuest has it, there's one drain right there that goes across the road, and when it rains heavy, it's up to the road level. And all that's going to be developed into residential will flow east toward my family's property over here. So we just want to make sure those concerns are addressed and that the stormwater is not going to affect those pieces of land when it's approved.
We do address that. The commercial part of it, of course, we would address the drainage through the site plan development process as they come in for permitting. Once they decide how they're going to develop it, we will review each development, and we will review it in terms of stormwater to make sure that they are handling the stormwater produced by the site. We that increase, which means the residential and the commercial, they cannot produce more runoff than existed prior to development. So anything that's created by the development must be handled by the development. It can't push any more water onto adjacent properties. So our engineering department reviews that, and they'll also be required through the construction planning process of the subdivision to submit drainage studies that will show how that drainage will be addressed.
Yeah, that's my only concern. Thank you.
anyone else in favor of opposition to the ordinance? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
All right, item 2 in the first readings is consideration of an ordinance to rezone property at 1694 Hollywood Drive from OR Office Residential District to OC Office Center District, comprising of 2.8 acres, more or less.
All right, Mr. Garrett is asking to rezone his property from OR, which is an office class, to an OC, which is another office class. And the only difference is the OC gives some additional uses that would allow him to market his property a little bit better. It addresses a zoning class that's already in the area. It's not introducing anything that's not already present. So he's had a couple of uses that have wanted to do sort of small scale retail, and the OR really doesn't allow that. It's basically an office class. So this would allow him to do that, and he's capable of meeting the requirements that would be necessary for parking and things of that nature. So the planning staff recommended to the planning commission, and the planning commission is recommending approval of it to you.
Any questions from council? This is an item on first reading, so open the public hearing. Are there any in favor of or in opposition to? Raise your hand. Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. And do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any further questions or discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 3 is consideration of an ordinance to close and abandon a portion of Cooper Anderson Road located at the northeast corner of Cooper Anderson Road and University Parkway.
All right, in your package, you'll see the materials pertinent to this street closure and abandonment. The part that you see in red on the map there represents the old right-of-way. If you're familiar with this area, Cooper Anderson used to make a curve, and this was the old alignment of the road. But when residential development was in this area began to develop, this intersection was realigned, and that old right-of-way is not necessary anymore. It was a holdover from when the area came in from the county, and so Mr. McAlexander is going to be developing this tract of land into residential, and he wanted to eliminate this right-of-way so that he could develop property to the right-of-way, the existing right-of-way. So the planning commission is recommending this to you.
Any questions from council? Again, this is a first reading on this ordinance. They're open to public hearing. Is there any in favor of or opposition to? Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 4 under first reading is consideration of an ordinance to amend the official code of the city of Jackson, Title 12, Building, Utility, etc. codes relative to vacant buildings.
All right, I will, again, you have the materials pertinent to this ordinance, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have concerning it. But I'll give you sort of a brief synopsis of this ordinance, and then you can proceed with how you want to go. If you want to go into detail line by line, we can. We might be here a while, but we can at least talk about the highlights. As you know, vacant buildings, especially those vacant buildings that are not kept up, that are allowed to deteriorate and to cause problems in areas, has an effect on property values. It has an effect on the economic vitality of an area. Surrounding areas in our redevelopment area, and we've looked at anti-neglect, we've looked at the building code, property maintenance, and so we settled on this tool that you have today, and the tool that we're presenting to you is a more streamlined, kind of concise way of bundling the issues that we have into something that someone can follow through systematically, and you will be able to accomplish the goals and objectives, which are to have buildings be in productive use and to have buildings that are dilapidated reach demolition, and so the properties can be reused for something more productive. So I'll start with just kind of giving you the premise of the code. It is within the building and utilities code section of our city code. We're creating a new chapter, which is chapter 13, and it's the registration of vacant and commercial industrial buildings. And there's a definition section, because with any terms that you use, you want to make sure that you define them so people know what you're talking about. So there are definitions for what is vacant, what is the fire code, what is a person in control, what is the evidence of vacancy, so that everyone is comfortable with knowing what we're talking about. And so it defines vacancy in here, and it talks about buildings that are overgrown. It talks about buildings that are just vacated and not used, and there's an absence of furnishings, and they're just people can tell that it's just sitting there vacant and not being used. And so you go through that section, and then it talks about the obligations of owners and persons in control, and basically this ordinance is creating a registry. We will go out and we will identify those buildings that are vacant, that are identified in this ordinance. We will make a listing of those. Once the registration, if this ordinance becomes effective, property owners are required, if they have a vacant building that falls in this category, to register that. But we know that that may not happen. We know that there may be out-of-town property owners that will not be aware of it, so we will notify these property owners. This ordinance does not go into effect immediately. It has a 60-day window, and that's just so we can get people on notice. We can let people know what's happening, and we can also explain to them the process and what's going on here. The registration section just talks about what we're gonna need. There are exemptions. Again, we did not want to create something that was burdensome, and so we created exemptions for a building that may be damaged by fire. We give them, we're not gonna make them register that as long as they're working to rehab the building and bring it back into productive use. There are exemptions if a vacant building is under active construction or renovation, because again, just like the Greyhound bus station right now, there's nobody occupying it right now because it's under construction. So that's accepted and understood in this exemption. Also, governmental agencies are exempted from this section because at time to time we're working on redevelopment projects and things, and so we have buildings that may not be occupied at the time. You see in there's a fee structure, and with any fee, there's always the question of how did you arrive at that? Well, we tried to arrive at something that was fair, that was not overburdensome, but also that was there so that, you want it to be there in case someone doesn't want to follow the process. You at least want to create a fee that it's not just easier for them to pay the fee and continue in the state that they are. That's, we're trying to accomplish a certain goal, so you have to establish a fee structure. And I know there's always people that say, well, could it be less, could it be more? And, we've tried to find something that matched, the administrative time and things that would be involved in carrying it out, and also something that would at least motivate people to register their building and to be motivated to carry the building to production, to a productive state. But revenue is not the goal here. We do not put this in place so that we can find a new revenue stream, because let me assure you, there's much easier ways to raise revenue. So this is not a revenue stream creator. This is just a way to accomplish what we've been trying to accomplish for years, is getting buildings in a productive state, or getting people to get those properties in hands of people that want to do something, and also just to gain information. A lot of times we have vacant buildings that we cannot find who's in charge, who's in control, and so we've got a building sitting out there, and it could be vagrants could be moving in, there could be safety issues with it, and finding somebody is really hard. So we want, this requires that in the registration we get someone on record that we can contact whenever there's issues with the property. So that's a big plus in this registration too. It's not just to put people on a ledger. It's to get people that we can contact if issues arise with buildings. You'll also see that there are 3 categories that buildings will fall into that are vacant. One would be those that are dilapidated and need to be demolished. And all we ask is that people give us a plan for that demolition. It needs to be not open-ended. It needs to have a time frame, and the ordinance creates a time frame of 12 months. So if you're going to demolish something, we want it done in 12 months, and anybody can do that. That's legitimate. That's not a problem. But also, there are some built into the ordinance. If someone needs to extend a period for circumstances that are beyond their control, we understand that, and we can grant extensions as long as someone is making progress. There's also a category called secured buildings, or putting the building in a secure state. And that's someone that doesn't necessarily have plans right now, but they have plans that they're moving toward. And so we ask if they're going to not do anything right now, but they secure the building. That means that they secure it in a way that's not, creates the look of that we're abandoning areas. So you'll see in here that when you have vacant buildings, we don't want them boarding up the first floor. Nothing's more distractive and creates a negative impact than walking down the street and a building sitting there with boards on the wall, windows and doors. That doesn't speak vitality, and that doesn't speak to someone that wants to invest money. So we want them to put the building in a way, secure it in such a way that the building still looks like you could go in and do something with the building, or that someone is doing that. We also have another category called rehabilitation, and that's where someone is renovating the building, and we ask that they make progress. Building permits are usually only, they're good for 12 months, so it corresponds with that. It says if you've got an active permit, you need to be making progress with your rehabilitation plan. It shouldn't take 6, 7 years to rehabilitate a building. So it makes, again, it puts thresholds in there so that people are making, movement in creating these buildings and reaching a productivity level. But it doesn't create burdensome timeframes. It creates realistic timeframes. There's also inspections that occur when they register and when they renew, so that we can keep track, okay, they registered this year, next year we come, has the building been maintained? Is it dilapidating? Is it deteriorating further? What do we need to do to help? And so there are also maintenance standards in here for during the vacant period, maintaining the building and keeping it up, because you don't want the building just deteriorating further. And we all know that buildings that are not used deteriorate faster, especially if you're not doing things like there's no utility zone, there's no climate control, there's, the buildings just deteriorate quicker. And so we're trying to create a process by which we don't have vacant buildings just become demolished buildings. We want these buildings to be used, because that's the best way to use your resources to use them. And so some buildings reach the end of their life and they do need to be demolished, but a lot of times buildings may not be at the end of their life, but because of disuse, they begin to reach that very quickly. So this creates mechanisms for that. There's also a section for appeals. If they don't like our decision, they can appeal our decision, and they can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that's with any order of the staff, planning staff, or they can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals if they don't like what we're saying. But in a nutshell, there are exemptions, there are fee reductions in here. If somebody has a building in good condition and they keep it in good condition, they can reduce their fee by 50%. So we feel like this is reaching the appropriate balance point between having a fee structure, having a process, but creating exemptions where necessary, having a fee that can be reduced if they're in code compliance, and also if they make the building productive in the 12-month period that they pay their fee, we'll refund it completely. So, I think you see our goal is not to regulate people to death. Our goal is to push buildings toward productivity, and that's all we're doing. And we also, some have asked, well, I see the stick part, but where's the carrot? And so the carrot is we have mechanisms in place. If somebody is wanting to productively use a building, especially in the downtown area and the area surrounding, we have a pilot program that gives them tax benefits if they're putting a building in productivity. We have other incentives through the CRA that we can help people reach productivity. So we feel like the carrots are there, and those that are wanting to reach that productivity level and have a viable building, there are processes available for them, and this will never be a burden to them, because if people are doing the things they are supposed to be doing to make a building productive, then this will not create a burden for them. In fact, there'll be incentives and helps in getting that building to that point. So again, that's a synopsis, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Stan, on the.
Yes, sir.
Can you help me kind of clarify one thing on the registration fees, of the initial registration fee of $400, and particularly when it comes to issuing a new building permit? Is that, if there's a project started in one of the zones, my understanding it, before the building permit is issued, there's a $400 registration fee, and then does that tie back into the refunding piece within a year, or is that?
If you have, again, these are addressing vacant buildings, so, if you have a vacant building that at the time at which they had to register, and within that 12-month period, that ends December 31st is what it talks about here, because or if it's, at other times, if you have a building that goes vacant in the year, it'd be 12 months from that date, but in most cases, there's a date that you have to renew every year. But if a building Is it vacant at the time you register? They have renovated the building and they have a tenant in it, then we'll refund that fee. If the building at the time of registration is in code compliance, then they pay 50% of that fee. They don't pay the $400, they pay $200. So it's, you know, there's things in there for exemptions and reductions for those that are trying to make progress, and you know that they're trying to make for them.
And then, I guess on just a practical note, I think if this were accepted, first reading, second reading, 60 days after that is when we would implement this. Do you feel confident kind of with the systems or, I guess, in your department or whatever departments overseeing that we can actually register, inspect, enforce, and kind of implement all of that, or do we need to make different changes to
Well,
actually solve that?
I think the way that I look at things is, you know, we haven't had this ordinance before, so that we don't know all of what's going to be created. We do know the logistical part of it, and we have our building department that's helping us, you know, with the inventory. We have our building department that will help us with some of the inspections, and we also have our fire department with the fire marshal that helps us with the fire part of things. So it's not just the planning department. We're more the logistical department, which is what we do best. Is we will take we have the forms, we will register people, and also as permits come, the permits route through our department. So we'll also be the agency that'll be looking at the permits, so we can also tie that back to this registration. But initially, just identifying people and then notifying people. Yes, there'll be some, but we do that every month. Every month we have a zoning, every month we have a public hearing, we notify people. So we have a good process for notifying. Now, enforcement, you know, we have enforcement mechanisms already. We have enforcement through environmental court. We have appeals process. We already have that in place through the Board of Zoning Appeals. So all these mechanisms are already in place. You know, we've been doing property maintenance thing through the building department for some time. This just kind of coalesces everything into a registration mechanism so that you can keep track of it. And that's the best thing, because you know in your own life, I know in my life, 3 years can pass in a blink, and you look back and say, when was the last time I was over there? You know, and a year might have passed, you know, 2 years. And so this at least keeps a registry, and it keeps it ever in our front of our minds so that we can track it. And it also creates a mechanism so that if we see that we're not accomplishing the goals that we want to accomplish, then maybe there's some other things that we need to do. Maybe there's some more helps that we can put in place to help people achieve productivity. And that, you know, that's what we'll be looking for is if we go into this and the inventory is not getting any smaller, then we want to evaluate that and say, okay, why is our inventory not getting any smaller? You know, is there some other hurdle that we need to address? So again, I think all these things are works in progress. I think we've got the mechanism in place. If we see that there's other things that are needed, we can always implement them. But I don't like implementing something anticipating there's going to be extra load. I like to go into things and see what the issues are going to be, and if we have issues, then we can always address them then. And you'll be more inclined to, if I come to you and say I need some resources, if I've got a proven record of I need it, then you'll be more in a frame to say, yeah, I see that, than if I just said, well, I think we may get more than we can handle.
I think that's an important piece of this, is the reporting of that. One thing that I would ask is that we could get semi-annual reporting on the number of buildings that we have, those that have been rehabilitated, those that have been demolished, and the fees that we're taking in on that as well.
Yes, sir.
The administration of this, so I'm hearing from you that's gonna come through the building department partially, through the planning department partially, and then the fire department would have inspections as well.
Yes.
Seeing the workload, we had done a smaller scale analysis of this downtown a number of years ago, and the workload involved in that, I think, can be pretty heavy in the front end. I think that will have some operating impacts on us. I'd like you guys to look at that and get back with the budget committee on how that may affect the operating budget especially for the building department and the fire department, as they will have to dedicate people and man hours to go inspect those.
And we, you know, some of these things, these activities that we're talking about are ongoing activities that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. The building department on a day-to-day basis, the housing department out of the building department handles dilapidated buildings, handles buildings that are, you know, vacant. And so we're handling some of that already. Now, as we move into it, you may be right. We may see that there's some additional things that we need to do to cover maybe some additional activity. But without knowing, you know, I don't want to just say that we're going to need it. I would like to see where we are, and then if we see that we're needed, then we can always come to y'all, and we've got a track record for why we feel like that's necessary.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Powell, good morning.
Good morning.
Just one vital question. What did this ordinance propose that the environmental court and the building department is not doing?
What does it propose that the environmental court and the building are not doing now?
Yeah. Building department.
Well, the proactive side of it is that we're requiring that property owners register those buildings. And that, if you ask Greg with the building department, he'll tell you that many times the hardest part of their job is just finding somebody responsible. And so the registration process creates a mechanism where you have to give us information where we can contact somebody and we can identify who's in charge with a building that may have problems, a building that has got issues. And so that, to me, that's one of the number one proactive aspects of this ordinance, is it will give us that registry. It also gives us the ability to track on a annual basis what status we're in, because or even semi-annually within the year if conditions change. But right now, sometimes there's no, we have a harder time tracking the status of a building and what's being done, because somebody can go out there and do a little bit and we're not aware of it, and we may not see any progress, and there may be some progress going on. So it at least gives us the ability to track that activity. Also, it will give us a pattern for what their plan is. And a lot of times, we don't know what that is. Somebody's got a building, they may be working on it, they may not be working on it, but we don't have a plan for what they're trying to achieve, because it may be we can help them. It may be that they have a plan that's runs counter to some other regulations. So it allows us to help them with that too, so that we're all on the same page. So the greatest aspect of this ordinance is information, which is half the battle sometimes, is just getting the right information.
Mayor, if I may, Stan, I had some concern to discuss that, as well as the images of this ordinance. As you know, this isn't something novel and new. Many cities have been doing this for several years now. What does make this a bit different is, and I want it on the record, is this is not residential, this is only commercial and industrial property, correct?
It would include multifamily, because multifamily is considered commercial, so it would include triplex and above. Again, there are cities that have commercial and industrial buildings, and this is not novel in that if you're looking within the ordinance, you'll see some dovetailing back to the property maintenance code for the building department, because a lot of this is contained within their code now. This just bundles it in a frame that allows us to register and get information. So a lot of the, because someone's asked me about that, well, aren't you trailblazing with something? Well, no, we're not trailblazing, because these authorities already exist within our code now. We're just bundling it in such a way that we can now have responsible parties that we can contact, where we have them give us information on what they're planning on doing, and we can follow them on an annual basis. And yes, there is a little bit of incentive to go ahead and do something if they've been sitting on the fence not wanting to do anything. So yes, there is that. But for the most part, it's not about creating a new regulatory mechanism and trying to create a new arm of the city. It's using the existing process we have, but bundling that authority into a registry where we can get information.
Sure. And my second question, I'm sure you have some idea, how many properties are we talking?
Well, we're in the process of gathering that. We'll have that for you by second reading. We'll tell you exactly what we're talking about. But
100, 200?
It could be in the range of 100. It could be less. It just depends, because we're going to have to kind of make some calls, because when we're going out and doing a windshield survey of vacant buildings, we may not be aware of what's going on with the building, because one of the things in this ordinance is they'll have to show us how they're actively marking the building. Well, driving down the street and getting a listing of vacant buildings, we may not know if they're actively being marketed or not. So that initial list of vacancies may be whittled down once we determine what state they're in, because we'll have to determine what 3 states they're gonna be in. Are they working toward demolition and they just hadn't made any progress? Are they gonna be securing the building, or are they gonna be rehabbing the building? So initially, we may have a big number, but then we may whittle that down once we get information.
My last question, these are current property tax payers as well, right?
They are in some cases not.
Some not.
Some not. I mean, that, again, a lot of times we have delinquent properties tax-wise, and they may be in a situation where it's in an LLC that we can't determine who the responsible parties are. So again, I think the key in all this is we will get someone associated with the property, we'll get some idea of what they're planning on doing, and we'll get some mechanism where we can track their progress and make sure that we're moving toward productive buildings. If they're not, then if they want to leave it in a secured state, they can. But we're just gonna require that they register each year and say they're doing that.
And we surely know our problems collecting delinquent property taxes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
One more time. Towards the percentage vacancy, has there been any consideration towards that? To give kind of an example, if you were to have 90% of a building that was occupied, 10% of it not occupied, would that be applicable towards a vacant property? Would that be considered a property within itself, or would that be considered, or would that be prorated per the percentage vacancy?
Well, we've talked about that, and that again, we could add a percentage threshold in there if we wanted to between now and second reading, if we felt like it clarified things better. Because again, I don't know that a 90% occupied building is gonna meet the test of being a vacant building anyway, because it just doesn't fall in that category. But again, to make clarity, we could put in a threshold that just says if a building is 50% occupied, and you know, and as long as the other 50% is being actively marketed, then it would be considered vacant.
And to the carrot stick point, we have a lot of carrots downtown. Some of these sub areas, I'm not sure if we have quite the same amount of carrots. I think that's something for us to look at in those redevelopment areas. I know there's TIF funds that are available for some infrastructural improvements, but you know, the pilot program, to my knowledge, is a CRA. The bounds don't extend into some of these sub areas. I think that's one of the things we'll need to consider, is to providing, maybe even allocating some of the revenue that would come in from this in order to have some additional incentives.
The majority of the sub-areas that are contained in the civic master plan are also in our redevelopment areas. So the CRA does provide incentives with the monies that we have. We have provided incentive for commercial development in East Jackson, and we still have funds left from that as long as they are eligible under HUD. In some of there's only like one area that's really outside of the redevelopment area that's not covered by the redevelopment area. So we can think about mechanisms that we might address there. You know, the pilot, you know, for the most part, the pilot corresponds with a lot of the downtown and adjacent area. You know, I don't know if it's something that could be expanded. If it's a redevelopment area, you know, the pilot would address that. That'd be something that you know, the Downtown Development Corporation, the Jackson Revenue Finance Corporation could address. But yes, we always want to have a toolbox that is complete with not only tools, but also the incentives that to help. Because I used to, in economics, they taught us, you know, in the tax code every year, the tax code changes, and basically what the government does through tax code is modify behavior that they want to produce. In other words, if they want you to be a saver, they'll give you benefits through the tax code to make you save. Or if they want to encourage, you know, the marriage, they'll give you marriage credits, or school. If they want adults to go back to school, they'll put credits. you know, the same way here is we want to make sure that we have the tools and incentives that produce the goal that we want to produce, and that is having viable buildings that are being utilized by people that are successful in Jackson. So as long as we're producing that, and I think what you said, having some reporting so that you can quantify if the tool is accomplishing the job that you want it to do. If it's not, then we can tweak it. If we need other tools or we need other incentives, then we can talk about that too.
Any questions? This is an ordinance on first reading, so I will open the public comments. Anyone in favor of or in opposition to the ordinance, raise your hand to be recognized. Seeing none, close the public hearing. Do you have a motion? So moved. Have a motion, second. Any other discussion from council? Council, please vote.
The motion passes with 7 members in favor, 1 abstaining, and 1 voting no.
Arnita, what did you record my vote as?
Did you abstain or did you vote?
No, I voted yes.
Okay, well then it's closed 8 to 1.
Item 8, second readings, consideration of the ordinance to close and abandon a portion of Jen Street between Young Street and the west margin of the North and South Railroad. Item was approved on first reading. Any questions from council? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 2 is consideration of the ordinance to close and abandon a portion of an alley that runs between Westwood Avenue, Campbell Street, Prospect Avenue, and North Lake Drive. This is approved on first reading.
So moved.
Have a motion, there a second? Have a motion and a second, any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Item 9, new business.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thanks, Nick. Council, if you look at item 2 under new business, we're going to remove that from the agenda. And once we get to item 1, if there's any questions on why we're removing that, we can have Bobby and I come up and address that. But item 1 under new business is capital needs summary presented by Councilman Taylor, who's the chair of the city's budget committee.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to give everybody an update, on the 23rd of July, the council's budget committee met. We had some really good discussions about some policies and procedures that we need to put in place in order to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of the community and being fiscally responsible. One of the first tasks that we were given was to start looking at our capital expenses for FY20. We opened that to the departments to submit those. Those were received, and you can see I've sat on in front of you the what I have referred to as my capital budget draft. This plan is a 5-year plan. We have some reoccurring needs, and so where we started was we started meeting with some of our capital-heavy departments, the engineering department, the fire department, the police department, and starting to look at their capital needs not only for this fiscal year, but for 5 years out. I believe that we're going to have to take a new approach where we're looking more long-term so that we can smooth our spending out over the next 5 years instead of lumping it on an as-needed basis. This, I believe, will make us more efficient, and in turn, I've challenged the administration here to start to tighten our belts on the operation side to free up some of that revenue that otherwise was going towards operating to now be allocated towards capital in the future years. At the present, we are not at, there are a lot of things that have to be adjusted over this year. We're going to need to borrow some money to make these capital needs. We had some significant requests from the fire department and from the engineering department as it pertains to fire trucks and other apparatus and street resurfacing. we had some money, that we had allocated previously last year, 1.3 million roughly, that was gonna go towards street resurfacing. I'm proposing that we, in addition to that, we add 2.6 million to Scott's budget. That will allow us to tackle 25% of our grade 1 and 2 streets per year. And so Scott has done a great job of evaluating and collecting an inventory of the streets that we have. He's rated those on a grade between 1 and 10, and 1 being the lowest grade, 10 being just freshly paved. And so the goal is to start to tackle those from the bottom up. So if there are multiple streets in a certain area that need to be tackled, we'll be tackling those as per the grade and starting to knock those out on a yearly basis. The fire department, Chief Samuels, he's been working towards, and I think we'll be meeting soon here in the next month or so on a 10-year plan that he's putting together for the fire department. But we've discussed spreading his needs out, because they are needs at the present, over the next 4 years. There's a couple of pumper trucks that are needed. I say a couple, there's 3 pumper trucks and an aerial vehicle that are needed over the next 4 years. They're already at the end of their operating life, and we're gonna need to replace those as soon as possible. So this year we have slated in this draft capital budget recommendation for one of those pumper trucks to be purchased, and in the subsequent years we'll purchase a pumper truck and or an aerial vehicle to meet the needs of the fire department. And in addition to that, we've gone into both the fire department and the police department and had discussions with them about their ongoing recurring needs. Many of you may be aware that we have a certain life on much of their equipment that needs to be continually bought on either a 5 to 7 year basis. And so we've started mapping that out onto our capital schedule as well. With all that said, you have this in front of you. The budget committee made a request for proposal on the refunding of some 2009 issued bonds. We had some unsolicited proposals that we used as kind of a benchmark, and we've sent that back out for final proposals. We should be getting, I'll let Al speak to that a little bit more. Well, I guess you won't be speaking to that, so.
We will be getting those proposals back on August 21st.
August the 21st.
So the next council meeting is September 3rd. We will be coming to the council with a resolution for not only refunding, but new money and possibly restructuring.
And by that point, to tell you where we are in the vetting of this.
Alan, Bobby, jump into the microphone so Bobby, get there a little quicker.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think everyone's aware, for some period of time, can y'all hear me? Does that work?
Yeah.
For some period of time, the city has been evaluating a couple of different finance options that Mr. Taylor has referred to. One to deal with existing debt of the city, and has been discussed. That would involve the possibility of refunding some of our current debt at a lower interest cost, thereby saving the city some money. Possibly restructuring the terms of some of our current debt payments. I think everyone's aware that I believe for the next, beginning this year, and then in 4 subsequent years, we have a significant jump in our debt service requirements each year. We are looking at the possibility of maybe taking each one of those years and extending those out maybe 1 more year. That too would kind of level out some of the debt service load the next 4 or 5 years. Another initiative that will be evaluated is current, variable rates have been very kind to the city and to others, been very low for an extended period of time. Right now we have about 1/3 of our debt is in variable rate debt. There may be a possibility with interest rates so low now, maybe even dropping in the future, that we might be able to convert some of that variable rate debt to fixed rate debt at this point in time, thereby maybe eliminating some of the future interest rate risk when rates begin to rise. So several initiatives like that surrounding our existing debt. And then it's been mentioned, we have been evaluating the issuance of new debt to fund a capital budget amendment that I guess will be coming maybe next month or shortly. We originally were looking at a way to fast track the new money issue, to have funds available for the capital budget. We've learned that might not be quite as an important issue right now as we maybe originally thought it would be. And we were evaluating ways to do that, but what we've concluded, and the reason that we've pulled the resolution that was on the agenda, is it's going to be, we want to do these address these finance issues in the most compliant as well as cost-efficient way that we can. So what we are now working toward, as Mr. LaFoon stated, is possibly next month you might see a comprehensive finance resolution that would address all of those issues, both the current debt and the new debt. That issue, we will be able to make sure that we do that in the most cost-efficient manner, and that we dot all the i's and cross all the t's in a compliant way as well. And really, in terms of accessing the money, if we stay on track, as Mr. LaFoon referred to, the RFP process is directed by the Budget Committee. That'll be wrapping up here in a couple of weeks. We can select our partner, you know, at that particular point, bring the resolution next month, and hopefully by, I would say mid to late October, be able to wrap up those financing initiatives.
Mr. Arnold, if I may very quickly, I would just applaud the administration as well as the Budget Committee for taking this route. I believe I had mentioned in the budget meetings that I had some reservations that we're moving kind of quickly, especially on the capital that we're trying to do now. And I think come back to us with a more omnibus package that would get us on track for all of the things that we need to do much more quickly.
Yeah, we feel that way too, Councilman Brooks, and as Mr. Taylor alluded to, there are some funds from a capital standpoint that have already been, our carryover funds that are available to the city now. So, any other questions, I'll be happy to try to address them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul, the only thing I want to ask you that you do when you meet with the fire department, as we map out a long-range plan, I want to make sure that we look at some of the actual facilities, such as fire stations that might need to be replaced, because I know we have some that are pretty old. At least two, we can develop a plan to include that, because we ask those firefighters to come in and live there for 24 hours a day, and I think they ought to have good facilities, you know, and I think, you know, the sooner we can do it, the better, in my opinion, because the sooner we can build it now, if at all possible, or at least in the next couple of years, it'll probably cost us less, because every year that goes by, you know, building costs will increase. And so we need to have good facilities for those folks as fire department.
Councilman Taylor?
That wraps it up.
All right. 892, off item 3 is notification of JAG 19 grant. Total grant is $43,095, split equally between city and county, with no match for the grant.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote's unanimous.
Item 4 is creation of the City of Jackson Anti-Poverty Task Force. And I'll ask Lauren Kirk and Alex Reed to come address the council about that.
Good morning, members of the council.
Good morning, Lauren.
Hey, what we have before you today, Ms. Kirk has put a lot of work into this on the initial goals and the candidates for the task force. One thing that really stuck out to me is 55% of African-American population in Jackson lives in poverty. That's something that we can't let go on like that. We've got to do something about it. And this task force will be the first step in it. It's not going to be a silver bullet, but we're starting the conversation.
Say that again.
I'm sorry?
Say that again?
Oh, I don't know if I can remember what all I said, but
No,
55.
no, not, just the statistic, not
Okay,
all of that.
55% of the African-American population in Jackson live in poverty.
And that's based on,
Census data?
pardon,
Census data.
census.
Yes, sir. That, if y'all have any questions, we'll be glad to take them. I don't know the answers. I bet Lauren does.
No operating budget?
This will just be like our other commissions where it serves as voluntary, unpaid, on a term basis that can be reappointed. I think we can evaluate in the future after making policy and program recommendations that need to be funded.
With the approval.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Discussion, do we have the, task force?
Next page. Next page.
Yes, sir.
Cause I had a recommendation.
We would love to add others on to you as we go on. This was just the initial.
Yeah, I had a recommendation.
They may already be on there,
Shit
Council.
on
All right, have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Thank you, members.
All right, item 5 is board appointments. Jackson Recreation and Parks Board, reappointment of David Sykes.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And Councilman Buchanan, you voting? And the vote is unanimous.
I started to say like the late, Ms. Westman said, I vote when I get ready.
Yeah, can we take these collective?
Absolutely. So take the rest of them elected board appointments.
of them, no problem.
All right. You make that your motion?
Yes,
Second.
A motion and a second to accept the rest of the board appointments and reappointments. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Cisco. Item 6 is the city council board appointments and liaison list. You have that before you.
Can we take those collectively?
Absolutely, yes. Is there a motion?
It is.
All right. Take a motion and a second. Any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
All right, item 7 is consideration of invoices over $10,000. Have a motion? Second. Second, any discussion? Council, please vote.
And the vote is unanimous.
Nothing else coming before the council? We're adjourned.